We're going to have a look at angles associated with parallel lines. Now, parallel lines can be seen anywhere and everywhere. You go down to the railroad tracks, the tracks are parallel. You're about to cross the road, you're looking at the paint lines on the road, they're parallel as well. In this beautiful picture here, again, of Whananaki South, we've got some fence posts and fence wooden panels which are also parallel. So you can see these two here, these two panels are parallel to one another. Then we've got our fence posts, so there's one there and another one there. They're parallel to one another. So parallel meaning that these two lines would never intersect, they would never touch. So if we're thinking about the opposite of parallel, then we're looking at something which is perpendicular. So if we have two lines that are perpendicular to one another, as in these two lines here, that means that they are at right angles to one another. So lines that are perpendicular are at right angles to one another. And so if we look at our example on our fence here, we can see that say this post here is perpendicular to that top post or that top rail. So perpendicular and parallel. So when we use parallel lines, we put these little arrows on the lines to indicate that they are parallel to one another. Okay, so here's another example. Imagine we've got a window frame here. So we've got lots of lines that are parallel to one another. So we've got the window frame here, so that line and that line are parallel to one another. So to indicate they're parallel, we need to have these arrows here. We also have lines that are perpendicular, so the outside frame, so if we're looking at that frame there, that frame, that edge frame is perpendicular to these two inner frames. So if we're looking at the outside frames of this window, okay, so those two are parallel to one another. And I'm going to put double arrows here to distinguish from these two lines here which have single arrows. So you want to match up the number of arrows to identify which lines are parallel to one another. Now if we look at this grey line here, we're pretending that this is a piece of masking tape that we've taped across the whole window, and that line it goes from one of the parallel lines to the opposite parallel line, and so the angles that we're interested in are the angles that are touching each of the parallel lines. So this angle here, this angle here, this angle here, and this angle here. Those are just some of the angles that we'd be interested in because they're angles associated with parallel lines, but we also need some other line which intersects the two parallel lines. So let's have a look at the types of angles associated with parallel lines. Before we do that, just a quick recap that we need the arrows indicating or identifying the parallel lines, and then just a note about any line that crosses parallel lines. So these two lines here are called transversals. So transversals are lines that cross parallel lines. So what do we need to identify? We need to identify firstly, I just touch base on this type of angles here, alternate angles on parallel lines. So alternate angles are angles that are on either side of the transversal. So we've got two parallel lines here. So this line and this line are parallel to one another, and we've got our transversal, which is just a line that crosses our two parallel lines. So alternate angles would be this angle here, so that angle, and this angle here. So alternate meaning on either side of the transversal and touching each parallel line. So you can see that this angle is alternate with this angle here. So we're sort of like on alternate sides of the transversal. So alternate angles on parallel lines, if you were to measure them, they are actually equal. So these two lines are equal. Another pair of alternate angles would be this angle here. Okay, so I've just colored that in pink, and this angle. Okay, so if you identify the transversal, okay, that these two angles in pink are on alternate sides of the transversal, but they also touch the parallel lines. So those two angles are alternate angles. Okay, the other pair of angles would be what's called corresponding angles. So these types of angles here. And corresponding angles look exactly the same. So just draw another pair of parallel lines. And if I draw a transversal, corresponding angles look the same. So if I identify this angle here, if I go to the other parallel line, the angle that is corresponding with this one is this angle here. So that angle here, corresponds with this angle down here. So they are called corresponding angles. And they are also equal. They are equal. So corresponding angles. And we call them corresponding angles on parallel lines. Another pair of corresponding angles would be there are 4 pairs of corresponding angles on parallel lines. If I look at this angle here, the angle there, so that angle there is associated with this line, with that parallel line. The other corresponding angle with this one would be this one here. So that angle there corresponds with this angle here. So those two angles are corresponding. So the other pair of corresponding angles would be this one, that one there, and this one. So those two are corresponding to one another. And the last pair of corresponding angles would be this angle here. Okay, so that one and this one. So those angles are corresponding and they are equal. And the last set of angles are what is called co-interior angles. So co-interior angles are inside the two parallel lines and on the same side of the transversal. So let's draw another couple of parallel lines and our transversal. So co-interior would be these two angles here. That angle there and that angle there. So those two angles are a pair and they are called co-interior. So co meaning like coupled, interior meaning inside the parallel lines, and they are on the same side of the transversal. And co-interior angles, if you were to measure them, they add to 180 degrees. So at this level, you would need to be able to identify these types of angles on parallel lines.